Once again, my phone has cut me off without my permission, but it was a good stopping point because I was just done doomsaying and about to start on something positive. Let's talk about the potential upside of the European Union and something which, as generally speaking, a believer in borders and a capitalist might be surprising for a lot of you to hear from me, is that in the long term, I am a believer in globalism. I think the best thing that could happen to us as a species and for our planet is for a single government to emerge that encompasses the world. There's a couple of problems with this. Now, what I would like to see is for an ideology to emerge that is so liberating, but also so correct. I guess I want to see an ideology win. For me, it's classic liberalism. I believe that people's liberties should be protected beyond anything else, and I hope that will eventually become the world order, because eventually there will be a world government. Whether or not it's in any of our lifetimes, it's only a matter of time, I feel. The most likely way for this to come about, sadly, is through conflict. It's very likely eventually someone with the power to do so, right now it would be America, decides that they're done with everyone else's nonsense and decides to take over. The other way that this could happen is, well, politically. This would be by nations forming together into super governments that, like the European Union, were essentially over their governmental policies and rules. The European Union was a step towards this. The United Nations kind of is at times as well, on a bigger scale. But if several of these emerged and then joined together, we would have essentially a world government. The UN is arguably the closest thing we have to one now, but I'll do a video on that another time. It's kind of laughable because they don't get anything done, which is very frequently the problem with too much centralization in government, though one that is going away, or at least the necessity of which is going away as we hit digital media speeds. Basically, as everything gets faster, it becomes easier for a centralized government to exist without becoming bogged down. Really, technology makes the Orwellian future possible. But George Orwell's 1984 predicted, spoiler, a world in which the entire world was controlled by one government, which made itself appear to be three governments, two of which were constantly at war and one of which was constantly allied with one side or the other. Basically, there was always a war with two allies and one bad guy. This was to keep up a level of patriotism that kept people from questioning the freedoms that were being taken away from them. It didn't lead to a very happy or necessarily even safe society. We didn't get the feeling that people felt particularly secure despite the amount of their liberties that had been taken away. In the real world, I think that that level of scrutiny would come with a certain level of security, closer to what might have happened in I, Robot had a stop not been put to it. But it's not worth our liberty. Human souls strive for freedom, strive for individuality, and maintaining, for instance, sovereignty as a nation as opposed to joining a super group of conjoined nations is just a step towards that individualism. The more that you homogenize, the more that you give in to, a world order, or that people around the world become more like each other, the more that some of them are going to strive to be different. It's why It's why teenagers have a rebellious streak, where it doesn't matter if you explain to them how bad an idea it is to break certain laws, they'll do it just to break a law. And I mean, I think a lot of us went through that streak when we were teenagers. Where I grew up, and I don't want to be sexist or anything about this. I'm sure it's not a women versus men issue. It's probably just the area I was in, something culturally. But where I grew up, teenage girls almost always had stories about like casually stealing things from stores, and it didn't matter their wealth bracket or any of their other identity sections. Teenage girls where I grew up, I mean, all of them, even some of the nicest, most honest religious ones that I knew growing up, had stories about sometime as they were a teenager just casually, not just once, but casually stealing from stores. And it's because it's sometimes liberating to break the rules as societies put more rules on us. As any government becomes more authoritarian, they'll see more and more rebellion among the people. It's just a part of human nature. We've seen it repeated too many times in history for anything else to be true. And yeah, humans evolve socially and potentially even physically still, but I don't think we're going to lose that section of who we are anytime soon. And so I don't think that we're ready for a world government. I think that a government needs to emerge that protects the liberties of the people without, putting too much authority on them. And I think that is a nearly impossibly delicate line to walk. I can't say for sure that we'll ever get there. I have hope, and I'd like us to. But whether or not we do, I think it is somewhat foolhardy to push for a world government before we're ready. I think that it will lead to rebellions and splits, and that any government that tried to form worldwide now would crumble back into at least several pieces. But especially with a base like that, we could see something Orwellian, like 2 or 3 governments popping up that are really basically the same and working together in order to gaslight the people. That being said, with the level of technology and information sharing going on, it would be rather hard for that to be accomplished without some serious censorships on our internet, which is exactly what the EU is trying to do. And I think that was the line that they crossed, that a lot of people decided they had had enough. That was the line. I mean, there were certainly other things, but I think that was the line where the British people decided that they'd had enough. Even if they voted for Brexit before that technically passed, the EU had been pushing for it for some time, and it was pretty obvious the direction that it was going. So, what is the moral here? Well, it's that if you form a collaborative government, stick to economics. Economically, for a long time, the EU worked quite well. And having trade partners and close trade agreements with the countries around you is an important and good idea. But stick to economics. Once you start putting your paws into people's social lives as a large centralized government power, they start to feel less and less individual. They start to feel the authoritarianism coming on, and sometimes even before it's explained to them in detail how authoritarian you're being, people will start to fight against it, which is what I think happened with the people who voted against the EU initially. They saw the path that it was on and were afraid. I think the EU could have been, and was at first, a good idea. One that would have potentially been worth saving were it not for 30 years of doing their best to subvert the countries that were in them sovereignty in every way, shape, and form. See, the European Union wants Europe to basically become a single country with its own sovereignty, with its own army, and once Europe, why not the world, right? I don't like to blame the Germans for World War II. It happened a generation ago. I mean, obviously the Germans were to blame back then, but Germany today, I don't like to blame modern Germany for World War II or to hold it against them, but Germany is basically in charge of the European Union. Angela Merkel has the most saying power, and to be fair, Germany does also donate the most money to the EU's coffers. However, like I said, there are two ways that the world government, which I believe in the long run is a good idea because I think it's the best way for our species to fight back against any extraplanetary threat that could come. Even just an asteroid, not necessarily aliens. I think a unified defense would be better against all the dangers of space, and there are lots and lots of dangers of space, potentially aliens. But the EU, like I said, there are two ways to achieve this government, which, as I've explained, I don't think we're ready for. One of them is militarily. Germany tried that twice. They, especially in World War II, were on the route for militant world domination. That's what they wanted, whether or not there was any realism to them achieving those goals. Well, perhaps Germany learned their lesson. Maybe the European Union started right at the cusp of the 2000s, was and is an attempt to take over the world the other way, politically. See, if the European Union got its own army and achieved its own sovereignty, it would rival potentially, especially if it absorbed the armies of the countries within it, and if Britain is not allowed to leave, it would be a fighting force to rival America's. Now, I don't know how much any of you keep up with America's military, but it is unnecessarily large. I mean, I'm all for a good national defense, and I don't think that we should gut the defense spending, but voting more and more in every year is a little bit ridiculous when our Navy is bigger than the next 8 navies combined and more technologically advanced. So, especially with our Air Force the size it is, we could potentially pick a fight with the next 5 biggest military powers, and I really don't think it would be a problem from what I've read up on the military of the US wiping the floor with them. If the European Union got funding for its own military, started building one, and absorbed the militaries of the countries within it, it would be one of the few ways for a fighting force to rival America's. Now, I don't necessarily think that it's good that America is on the path to having a military power, or potentially already has the military power to take over the world if they decided to. I don't necessarily think that's a good thing, and a balancing factor wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. I do think that the European Union has shown more signs of active imperialization of late, and I would be more afraid of them achieving a similar military power because, and partially because it's Germany in charge, I think they would be more likely to do something with it. I think they are more on the path to globalization than America is, at least by and large, and I just don't want them having a big military power. So I support the sovereignty of countries in general, and I completely understand and support the decision of the British people to leave the European Union, who are becoming totalitarian and imperialistic. If any of what I've said doesn't sound true, feel free to debate me in the comments below. I've read up on the subject quite a bit of late, even if I couldn't remember all of the names of people I wanted to for this video, as, I don't know, perhaps the ocean is distracting me, but I'm an American who knew basically nothing about the European Union until a year ago, and has only fairly recently begun taking any interest in the topic whatsoever. And I'm now very, very interested, but there's a lot that I don't know. So if someone from the UK happens to see one of my measly little videos and wants to take umbrage with any of what I've said, please do so. I would love to learn more. Ooh, a seal. I would love to learn more in the comments below. Anyway, this video in 2 parts has become quite long, so I'm going to let you guys go. That is a moderately informed American's take on the European Union and Brexit, with a little off-topic ranting in the middle. As always, I know you humans need to be reminded to like and subscribe. Please do so. I'd love to see the channel grow into something that I can take on the road. I mean, more than I already do at the carnival. As always, thanks for watching the Devil's Advocate Debate Club. I'm your host, Lewis Cipher, and have a wonderful and beautiful day.